Welcome to the weekend edition of the Fear and Greed Business Headlines, the week that was a wrap of the biggest stories over the past week. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael. Now, before we go further, I want to know, how have you enjoyed the week? As our regular listeners would know, we've made a few changes. There's two of us, Michael and I, doing the morning show now. Are you enjoying it, Michael?
I certainly am. I've learnt an awful lot. I particularly enjoy when you put me on the spot.
Like now, my favourite feedback during the week, generally we've had very positive feedback about it. My favourite feedback during the week was a woman I ran into when I was walking one morning. She's that new Michael fella. He's got a real newsreader's voice. Her point was that I didn't, but I thought there's a great compliment to you, Michael.
Oh, thank you, anonymous woman that you ran into while walking. She is now my favourite listener.
Indeed.
All right, let's jump into it, shall we? It was a huge week this week for Scott Morrison and for global affairs, for bouncing markets and Chinese property crises and for COVID cases. But really, what a crazy week for markets. Down, 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 and then up, up, up. What was that all about?
Well, two things. A group called Evergrande, which is a big Chinese property company, and global central banks. Let's start with Evergrande. It's the biggest property group in China with about $300 billion in liabilities. It's already defaulted on loan repayments, and this week it had to make coupon payments to investors. The fear was that it wouldn't have enough money to do so, and that would hit the Chinese market, which would hit the global market. Financial markets generally were very nervous. Not often do you see a company that large looking like it could go under. People were fearing it was going to be another Lehman Brothers moment. In the end, the Chinese government stepped in and threw cash into the Chinese economy, which kind of helped allay concerns around that. And Evergrande said it was able to pay the bondholders. That's the first part of the story. The second part of the story is global central banks around the world. Now, it was a big week for them meeting and talking about what's going to happen on inflation, economic growth, and then interest rates. Basically, it fell down to three categories. There was a group of central banks that think things are going okay, but not much better than that. The Reserve Bank fits into that. The Bank of Japan fits into that. Broadly, they said rates are still on hold. Mind you, the local central bank, the Reserve Bank, did make it clear that it believed the economy would come out of COVID okay. The second group thought things were a bit better. So the economies were growing a bit faster, a few more inflation pressures around. The US Federal Reserve and the Bank of England fitted into that. And then there was a third category, things were a lot better. Now, Norway Central Bank, not something we've ever mentioned on Fear and Greed before. We will from now on. They lifted interest rates. So at the beginning of the week, it was all about Evergrande and collapsing property prices and markets were falling. By the end of the week, everyone was a bit happy about this stronger economy. So it went down, then it went up. You can't say markets aren't fickle.
Yeah, absolutely. So what's it all mean, though, for commodity markets then?
Well, it hasn't done anything to becalm commodity markets at this point. Coal, gas, base metals, they're all doing well. Oil hit a 10-week high this week. And with the Aussie dollar trading around that 73 US cent mark, don't expect any relief at the petrol pump anytime soon. The other commodity to go on a roller coaster ride this week was iron ore, and we all know how important that is for Australia. It got as low as $90 a tonne in futures trading. That's down from $230 a tonne back in May, but it did rebound somewhat towards the end of the week, but it's now about half what it was 4 months ago. And that's hit the big three miners, Fortescue, BHP and Rio Tinto. In fact, Fortescue this week, its share price hit a 52-week low.
Now, Sean, it feels like we have spent a lot of this week looking overseas.
I think we did. We were following the Prime Minister. Look, I'll have more to say on that in a moment, but there was plenty of other international news around. Michael, I'd really like the one about Honda saying that a shortage of semiconductor chips meant that its production levels had fallen to 40%.
Yeah, it's pretty extraordinary, isn't it? And the flow-on effect that has to the difficulties of people getting hold of a new car, and then the benefit for someone trying to sell a used car. Suddenly the price has gone up. This is probably the only time in history that your new car won't actually depreciate the moment you drive it out of the car yard.
Yeah, I think that's right. Look, there was another interesting one out of Associated Press. It's estimated that COVID has now killed as many Americans as did the 1918-19 Spanish flu pandemic. That's about 675,000. Quite a remarkable statistic. Of course, the population is a far, far greater now than it was 100 years ago, but it just shows the damage COVID has done.
Yeah, and plenty happening in global politics as well. Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, he won a third term, but still, as a minority government, He actually went to the polls 2 years earlier hoping to win a majority government, but clearly didn't quite get there. He is a big spender. He's keen on environmental change. So in for a few more interesting years in Canada.
Exactly right. And of course, Germany is going to the polls this weekend, and it's likely that if the Greens don't get in, they'll certainly have some seat in government. So the biggest economy in Europe and the fourth biggest in the world is shifting left. Another interesting one this week was China's President Xi Jinping. He said that China wouldn't build any more coal projects overseas, part of its push to allay global concerns about carbon emissions. Of course, Beijing is still commissioning lots of local coal-fired power stations, but, at least it's a start.
You've got to start somewhere, I suppose. Now, back home, the COVID news, always a pretty big feature of the week. New South Wales is improving, or at least it seems to be stabilising.
Yeah, the numbers were sort of the low thousands. There was one day where it started with 9, as in 900s. There are still too many deaths. One day there was 13, a couple of days there were 12, yesterday there were 11. Hospitalisation rates are down. The good news is that if you're vaccinated, you're unlikely to actually go to hospital. By far the disproportionate number entering hospital in New South Wales haven't had double vaccinations or have only had one jab. That state does seem to be plateauing somewhat. Unfortunately, the numbers in Victoria are getting worse. They're being measured in the 700s now. That's up quite a bit from a week ago. And again, hospitalisation numbers are rising there, so too deaths. The ACT seems to have kept a fairly tight control of its outbreak. The numbers there are basically in the teens. I think governments this week wanted to make it all about vaccinations. Moderna arrived in the country. That was great news. The government decided that kids 12 years and older could access the Pfizer vaccine. About 50% of the population is now fully vaccinated and 74% have had the first jab. But Michael, I've got to say, of all the COVID news, what I will remember most is really the protests this week.
Yeah, shocking scenes in Melbourne. Really, really ugly scenes. And I think the thing that really struck me was the way then it started to blur the lines between what was a vaccination protest with the construction workers and then becoming a bigger protest regarding lockdowns and anti-vaxxers overall. And it was just really unpleasant to see.
Yeah, I think that's right. By the end of the week, it was the far-right groups and the anti-vaxxers rather than the CFMEU running the protests. Let's hope there's not too much of that and there's not a super spreader event as a result, because it's very possible that there could be.
Yeah, I completely agree. But there was a bit of good news as well about our international borders, and this is actually really good news.
Really good news. The Trade Minister, Dan Tehan, said that borders would open once the 80% vaccination rate was reached. That's expected to be later this year. QR codes will be linked to passports, and that'll show your vaccination status. And once you are fully vaccinated, you'll be able to travel overseas. At the moment, though, when you come back, you will still have to do the 14-day quarantine period, although the government is working with other countries to create bubbles to reduce those quarantine times.
Now, looking at federal politics, I love news poll data. I just like looking to see what it means. But now it seems you have to take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because in recent years, polling does seem to then be flipped on its head by the time you actually reach election day.
That's right. In the last couple of elections, polls haven't done a good job predicting the outcome. The latest news poll has Labor ahead on a two-party preferred basis, 53 to 47. There's an election due before May next year. Anthony Albanese, the opposition leader, has the lowest personal approval rating since taking that job from Bill Shorten. Not good news for him, but as Laura Tingle told us during the week, there doesn't seem to be any sign of challenges.
No, and the other big story in politics this week was the resignation of former Attorney General Christian Porter from the front bench, and that was really over the $1 million blind trust that was used to pay some of his legal bills for the defamation case that he had against the ABC, which was a case that he neither won nor lost, but it certainly then cost him his position on the front bench.
It sure did. I think it didn't pass the pub test. It didn't pass ministerial standards. The idea that you can just take $1 million from someone you don't know and use that to prosecute a defamation case, it's a bit naive, particularly for someone who used to be Attorney General of the country.
Yeah, absolutely right. All right, let's have a bit of a look at corporate news. There's been plenty of corporate action this week.
Yeah, given all the noise around Evergrande out of China and the global central bank movement, it's quite amazing how much was going on in the local market. So we started with Transurban buying the 49% of WestConnex, that's a toll road in Sydney that it doesn't own, from the New South Wales government. That's a $10 billion pickup. Then the private equity group EQT pulled its bid for financial software platform Iris. That was supposed to be worth $2.3 billion. Westpac's plans to sell its Fiji and PNG businesses was scuttled, so it has to go back to the drawing board on that one. And then Brookfield bid $9.6 billion for energy group AusNet Services. Now, it got to do due diligence on the back of that $9.6 billion bid. APA then came over the top and said, we'll bid $9.9 billion and we want to have a look at the books. Of course, Brookfield has said, well, no, we've got an exclusive due diligence arrangement with AusNet. So APA has gone to the takeovers panel saying, well, our bid is bigger. Surely we should get access to what's underneath the hood there. What it really does show is how valuable infrastructure assets are in Australia at the moment. We've spoken a bit about the super funds buying into it, but Brookfield is a fund manager. APA is a listed group. We know the super funds love all these infrastructure plays. It's just incredible how popular infrastructure is at the moment.
Okay, now we get to the point in the program where we go through the biggest story of the week, the sleeper story, the most remarkable story, and our favourite story. And Sean, let's see whether we agree on these ones. I think that the biggest story of the week was Scott Morrison and his round the world in 7 days trip.
I totally agree. He was resplendent in the Australian mask, I thought, hanging out with Joe Biden, Boris Johnson from the United Kingdom, Narendra Modi from India, Emmanuel Macron from... No, definitely not Emmanuel Macron from France. They're not actually talking. Yeah, look, it was a pretty impressive effort from the Prime Minister this week. Obviously, the week started at the back end of the deal with the United States and the United Kingdom to create AUKUS, which includes buying nuclear subs worth $80 billion. We all know how upset France was as a result of that. We also know how upset Beijing was, saying it was a fairly provocative move. The Prime Minister was in Washington for the official announcement, and it really did work out well for Scott Morrison. He's closely aligned Australia with the United States and the United Kingdom, certainly the most enduring allies we've had over the long term, but he's pushed it away from China. Not everyone's happy with that. Paul Keating's not happy with that, the former Prime Minister, nor are many of the miners who sell plenty of products to Beijing. But, Michael, I've got to say, one of the highlights for mine was Scott Morrison sitting down with Narendra Modi, the Prime Minister of India, agreeing to fight climate change. Now, India is one of the biggest emitters in the world, and on a pro rata basis, as in per head of population, so is Australia. Both countries have totally refused to commit to carbon neutrality by 2050, but there they were, preaching to the rest of the world how they would lead the way in reducing carbon emissions.
It's quite extraordinary. And I did see in a series of meetings that the Prime Minister had with both sides of politics in the US that at one point he was being thanked for his leadership on climate.
Nancy Pelosi, amazing.
Exactly, which did just strike me as a little bit odd.
Look, I'm a fan of Nancy Pelosi. I think she's an incredibly capable individual. I just think she got that one wrong. Mind you, maybe she'd spoken to Josh Frydenberg a few days earlier or something, because he came out yesterday saying that the government should commit to a carbon neutrality by 2050. Even Barnaby Joyce kind of made noises yesterday that it wasn't a bad idea. So I suspect they're opening the way before the Glasgow meeting later in the year for Australia to do that.
Yeah, the shift is starting. All right, the sleeper story of the week. For you, Sean, what was it?
Well, for me, I think it was the one where Zipco bought into Zest Money, which is an Indian buy now, pay later group. It's got 11 million registered users and about 10,000 online merchants. Now, that sounds like a lot, but not really for India, given that's got a $1.4 billion population. Why I think it's a sleeper, Australian companies have really struggled to get into India. It's incredibly bureaucratic, and a lot of the regulations there have favoured local companies. But it is trying to become more international. The Quad meeting this weekend, in which Narendra Modi, Scott Morrison, Joe Biden and the Japanese Prime Minister Yoshihide Suga, they're all meeting. The fact that Australia is talking to India about these sorts of things, be it at a strategic level, and we have local companies buying into Indian companies, I think we will get closer to that country. And with that bigger population, it really does provide opportunities for Australian business. That's why I think it's a sleeper story.
Yeah, it is a big one. I don't quite agree that it's the sleeper story
Oh,
of
Michael,
the week.
the first day on a Saturday, and
That's
you're disagreeing.
right. That's right. I'm not here to agree with everything you say, Sean.
What is it?
It is all about property. It is all about property prices, and it is what the Commonwealth Bank boss, Matt Comyn, was saying
Fair point.
late this week when he said that he was worried about the speed at which property prices are rising, and then saying that banks should act to cool the market, because it is pretty remarkable when the country's biggest lender that makes a lot of money from providing mortgages to home buyers is actually calling for a slowdown in the market and is prepared to take action to do that.
Yeah, I totally agree. This week, ANZ boss Shane Elliott also came out and talked about the divide and the social problems that were occurring because of housing affordability issues. The Reserve Bank Assistant Governor Michelle Bullock came out and said they were a bit worried about indebtedness. All this isn't about now, the next 12 months. It's about 2, 3, 4, 5 years' time when interest rates do start to rise and people find themselves with these massive home loans, which they're struggling to pay.
Definitely a sleeper story. Maybe we can just have 2 sleeper stories for this week.
Today, that's a fair point.
Excellent. Now, the most remarkable story of the week for you, what was it?
I love the one about the 4,500 kilometre cable that's going to run from the Northern Territory to Singapore via Indonesia, carrying energy or power that's generated via solar panels in Tennant Creek in the Northern Territory and will power the island of Singapore. Now, it's a $30 billion project, a fair way to go, but the Indonesians this week gave their approval to it. Mike Cannon-Brooks from Atlassian and Andrew Forrest from Fortescue Metals, they're both big backers of it. I just love the story because I like the idea that it's a renewable energy project from Australia, so we're exporting renewable energy, which I think is fantastic, but the science just blows me away.
You know what, Sean? I was all set to disagree with you, but you are right. That is a really remarkable story. I still have one that I'm going to nominate, but
we're allowed to have a second place.
Okay, second place then would be, for me, AMP, not just dipping below $1, but hitting 91 cents. Now, this is, or was, the bluest of blue chip stocks. 170 years of history, got absolutely hammered in the Royal Commission for charging fees for no service, has just been declining in recent years. There's a new CEO there, Alexis George, has a heck of a job to do.
She sure does. She's got her work cut out. It's no longer a big company. Its market cap is now about $3.1 billion. It's not far from slipping out of the top 200 companies in the country. This is AMP. I mean, QBE is 6 times the size. QBE Insurance is 6 times the size of AMP. It really has been a dreadful few years. Good luck to Alexis George. I think she's very capable, but she's got a lot of work to do.
Yeah, big job. Now, our favourite story of the week.
We're going to agree on this, I guarantee.
I know we will, because we are both avid TV viewers. It's the streaming services.
Yeah, totally.
What's the story?
Well, I love the fact that we got the numbers for the streaming services. And in the last couple of years, it's incredible how many new services seem to have come into my household. And I reckon I have 6 or 7 subscriptions. So I'm not just talking about the free ones. I'm actually paying for these things. What's interesting, Netflix remains at number 1. It's got 6 million subscribers in Australia. Stan was number 2, but that's gone back to number 4. It's got 2.4 million. The second one is now Amazon Prime at 2.9 million. And I thought that couldn't be right. And then I looked at my TV and one of the kids has subscribed to it. So I'm one of those 2.9 million. Third is Disney Plus. My kids are old. We've still subscribed to Disney Plus, 2.6 million. And then comes Stan. Kayo has done pretty well. That's the Foxtel subsidiary. Kayo has 1.1 million subscribers. That's all according to Telsight's 2021 Australian Entertainment Subscription Study.
And the streaming services then featured very heavily at the Emmys this week. And I know we are starting to veer well away from business news.
Did you know, I used to live in New York, and in the apartment building, our neighbours, the woman was a partner at one of the big accounting firms, and she actually had the job of walking the envelope onto the stage during the Emmys. So, it comes and the best show is...
Yep.
So all of that is audited by one of the big 4 accounting, or it used to be. I presume it still is. It was audited and tightly kept secret. Her job was to do that, But as her reward at the best show or whatever it was, she got to walk on in her outfit and give the results to the host.
That's extraordinary. And that's a job that was probably flying fairly well under the radar until a few years ago. Remember when at the Oscars they got the wrong winner for the Best Picture?
Yes.
And that was the year that I don't think auditors typically are very high profile. There were 2 auditors that year that were well and truly featured in the headlines for a reason they did not actually want to be
My
there.
friend was not one of them.
Oh, that is a relief. Geez, we digressed a fair way there, but the streaming services did do very, very well at the Emmys, and so they should, because Hacks was one of the big winners this year, won a lot of awards, and is probably the best show that's currently on streaming services.
Tumbleweeds. No one's agreeing with you. Ted Lasso was the one that won all the awards. It's the best show on streaming services at the moment.
Well, I can't really disagree with you because I haven't seen it. So you know what? I'm going to go binge it across the weekend, and
Good.
I will refute you next Saturday.
Fair enough.
And that's everything you need to know from the last week. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thanks, Michael.
I'm Michael Thompson. We'll be back on Monday morning with the Fear and Greed business headlines. Look forward to your company then.